The inventory process we started last time is on 64, and we'll review the inventory process, starting with resentment inventory, finishing with sex inventory and fear inventory. But on the very bottom of the page it says column 1 was the easiest set of directions. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And then column 2 is we asked ourselves why we were angry. The more in-depth parts are 3 and 4. And in column 3 it begins with, in most cases it was found that it affects our self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relationships. There's 7 of these total at the top of page 65. Including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore, we were burned up, and then here's the other parts. Our grudge list was set opposite each name. Our injuries, was it our self-esteem? That's another one. It affects security, or our ambitions, or personal relations, or sex relations, and which had been interfered with. A lot of times for me it is self-esteem, and security is a big one. I boxed that out because I don't feel secure and trust my higher power will take care of it, or things will be okay. That's a lot of times resentments come up for me. Self-esteem is also another big one. When I was dating, more often sex relations came up, and that helps me get clear for the 4th column what my part in it was. Knowing where it stems from, these 7 parts: self-esteem, pocketbook, ambitions, personal relationships, self-esteem, security, sex relations, personal relations, and ambition. Those are where a lot of my resentments come up, and they show you how to write the first 3 columns here with Mr. Brown, and the cause was his attention to my wife. That's column 1. Here's column 2, and then it affects his sex relations and self-esteem. He was also mad because he told my wife of my mistress. That affects his sex relations, self-esteem, and security. He also wrote a fear inventory on that one. Brown may get my job at the office. That affected his security. Obviously, you don't have a paycheck. Self-esteem. He also was resentful at Mrs. Jones because she's a nut. That's why columns 1 and 2 are fun and easy, because we just say who I'm mad at and why I'm mad. And then she snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. But the parts that affected in him are here: his personal relationship and his self-esteem. It looks like he also wrote a fear inventory on that one, which we'll get into on page 67. His employer, he was resentful at because the employer is unjust, unreasonable, overbearing, threatens to fire him for drinking. He was padding his expense account. That's why he's going to be fired. So it affects his self-esteem and security, as he won't have a job and maybe no self-worth, which a lot of folks are self-esteem isn't our job. He wrote a fear inventory on that. Fear of losing a job. And then my wife misunderstands. That's interesting. That's the 7th column. 7th part of 3rd column is pride. And I forget where they mentioned it up top, but so again, in 3rd column, it can affect our self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal relationships, security, ambitions, sex relations, personal relations, and pride. And then personal, sex relations, and security, because his wife nags. She likes Brown and wants to put the house in her name, probably because Bill Wilson was drinking himself to death. So he had a few resentments that are good examples we got for columns 1, 2, and 3, and explains a little more with 4th column in this next page. We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness, and honesty, and that's circle, because this really is just for you. This isn't supposed to be broadcast all over the internet. It's shared with a sponsor who you trust, so that's where the honesty and thoroughness to not forget anything is so important. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people are often quite wrong. So, to conclude that others were wrong is as far as most of us ever got. And I'd be resentful and I'd bitch about it, is what he's saying. So, that's the cue after that. And did I get further than columns 1 and 2? And that's why resentments lead me to drinking, because it shuts off the brain from thinking about that resentment. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. So when I retaliated, the worse matters got, and that's why I underlined that. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Maybe I vandalized their front yard, toilet paper their house, a lot of resentments as a teenager when I started drinking. And then in college, other ways I retaliated. The matters got worse. You almost get fired or kicked out of school or lose your job. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. So it is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness, and not just mine, it says. For a lot of us. For the alcoholic, resentments are more poison and toxic because it sets off our phenomenon of craving, drink over it, and the obsession maybe first, then the phenomenon of craving, and we go on a bender. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? But the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resent with it, essentially. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. So with the normal person, they can be okay with alcohol, but we have that phenomenon of craving part, and it nearly kills us. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. They may be the dubious luxury of the normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. So we're done with columns 1 through 3. And they're going to get on to 4th, which is where some of our healing begins, and we even find our possible amends. We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see the world and its people really dominated us, and that's the second column. They really pissed me off. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. And that's drunk or sober, because if I'm resentful and retaliate, sober, it's easier than when I was drunk and passed out somewhere. Sober, I drive across town and drive through their front yard and could maybe hit a tree or something, you know. Crazy example, but how could we escape? He's saying, we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was our course. We realized that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Perhaps. And that's why they cover that part of it. Though we did not like their symptoms, and that's column 2, and the way these disturbed us, column 3, it affects my pocketbook or self-esteem or ambition and security at a job. It disturbed us. They, like ourselves, were sick too. And this is kind of the sick man prayer, or when we're angry, to recognize they're sick also. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. And a lot of times that's getting away. If I'm that upset, I'm being helpful by getting away from the person initially to maybe go right. about it. Thy will be done. We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. And this is the fourth step promise. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. And that's hard sometimes, but it is possible. Referring to our list again, we're going to do fourth column in this paragraph. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish? Column 1. Maybe it's easier to call it row 1 instead of a column. And the fourth step, my part. Where am I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid? Those are the 4 parts of the fourth column. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. It's not about them now, it's about me. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours. And I see that that's underlined. It does appear to be, going into the resentment part and where we might owe an amends.